Welcome once again to Wednesday night at SciArc. Are we okay? It's a tremendous pleasure to introduce Annie Chu to all of you. For those of you, which I presume is most of you, who are either SciArc people or SciArc fans or SciArc visitors, I guess that covers it all. The pleasure is for those of us that have probably spent far too much time teaching to introduce someone that we can really call SciArc homegrown in so many ways. Not to say that Annie, as we would of course all hope, would become something more than what the ingredients were in terms of her association with SciArc. But somehow the SciArc and the SciArc family have played a large part in Annie's life, and as I said, it's such a pleasure to see one of the graduates emerging as a rising star within all of this. I talked briefly today to one of Annie's former employers, who is a kind of former student, no, present student of mine, Todd Williams. And he said that Annie was a terrific softball player. See what Annie thinks about that. Of course, had glowing remarks for Annie. I first came in contact, Annie was not a student of mine, but came in contact with Annie when I first started teaching at SciArc, and someone, now completely forgotten I must say, although I think it's a present faculty member here at SciArc, said that I just had to see Annie's final project and be on the review and talk about it, which I did. Annie then, and this is the SciArc family part, continuing, Annie then went to work for three also former students, Pat Oliver, Heather Kersey, and Ms. Georges, and which was quite exciting at the time. This Heather's maintains her presence here at the school. It was the only woman firm in Los Angeles, and well, I won't say it that way. There were others, but they were certainly one of the first, and we all had great aspirations for it. We're seeing it realized in other ways. To make Heather, who is not here tonight, so we can tell some stories, but Heather, Andrea, and Pat used to argue a lot, and therefore not get so much work done. But Annie was there and actually produced most of the projects. Annie then migrated to New York, I think with her former present husband, Rick Gooding, who is also a SciArc graduate, and they both, at one time or another, ended up in this office of Billy Chen and Todd Williams. Todd, as many of you know, worked for Richard Meyer in the days, well, in the early days, and was actually, I think, and many others do think, responsible for a great deal of that work. Annie's presence within the firm of Todd and Billy is perhaps not the same as, because I never saw Richard pick up a pencil, not the same as Todd's impact in terms of Richard's office, but Annie's presence was more than an employee in the office of Todd and Billy. She was a kind of collaborator. Todd and Billy both, or Todd this morning said that he thought Annie was one of those rare people who could, she is definitely interested in how things are made, and believes in how things are made with respect to what we do as people within those things, and therefore can focus on the most minute sort of detail of all of that. But she also has the ability, and this is the part that astounded both of them, to be able to step back from all of that and see the many larger pictures, some of which made you wake up in the middle of the night sweating and worrying about the project, but others had to do with the intellectual content, the conceptual value, the meaning, et cetera, of the project. Annie then came back to the sender, California, and has been involved in teaching here, both at SCI-Arc and at UCLA, and seems to be working in 3 firms at the same time. 2 of them she's a partner in, Annie Chu, Rick Gooding, and she's also a partner in the firm of Frank Israel, Barbara Callas, and Annie Chu. And then finally, I think, I might have this wrong, is an employee in the firm of Frank Israel and Associates. I don't see the nod. Annie has made in the short time she's been here, I think 3 years, come back 3 or 4 years, a tremendous contribution in architecture in Los Angeles. You're going to have the pleasure tonight to see several projects, but I think very much so the project in Riverside that is quite exciting, and I guess we hope one day will be built. Again, it's such a pleasure to introduce someone who is up and coming and won't be stopped. Annie Chu.
That was too much. But thanks very much for the warm reception, and it was great to be back at SCI-Arc. Just to clarify a few things, the firm's name that I'm a partner in, besides doing work with Rick, is Israel Callas Chu Shortridge. Barbara Callas is here. I don't know if Stephen is here. There's also another thing I need to clarify. On the lecture poster, this lecture was billed as in conjunction with Frank's show, which is currently at MoCA, and that's somewhat of a mistake. Both things are happening within the same timeline, but I'm certainly not going to talk about that show. So we'll try to make this one short, but you know, when you're young and you start doing some things, you're trying to be comprehensive in terms of where you started from and where you're going. I think, first of all, from what I've learned to this date, there's no more Howard Rourke. And I think part of what my work is about a kind of interpersonal relationship, about collaborations with everyone that I've come in touch with. And that has been basically the fuel that has driven me to continue investigating in my work. My harshest critic and my greatest collaborator to date is here. So this makes this lecture is a little bit scary for me because I've actually never lectured in front of Rick before. And it's very hard to talk about your work in front of your former critics. And so I'll try to do it as concise as I can. The structure of the slides that you see tonight basically is divided into several parts. The first part, I'm going to go back to the work that I worked with Todd and Billy in New York. And then interjecting in that is some independent projects that I've done while I was in New York. And a few projects that are collaborations with various artists. And then a really key show that happened after Columbia, which I went back to school, and very fortuitously, a very good classmate of mine just happened to be in town today, Mike Cranfield, he's sitting there. And I'll show a project from my school days and the influences that one project had and my work that's subsequent to that. And then I'll go through work that I've done since I've been back to LA. Guess we can start the slides. Okay. The Spiegel Pool House is an addition to a domestic space, which is the bedroom space of a house in Kings Point, Long Island. Is it too much feedback? This is one project which got me started in talking with Todd and Billy about the issue of the work of architecture as an object and how it relates to landscape. This project, as you can see on your slide on the left, is basically a pool house for a lap pool. It encompasses a courtyard here, which has a split-leaf maple tree, which you can see part of the canopy here. And then a whole series of fenestration, which then leads out to the landscape beyond. And at a first point, looking at the building sits very much as a landscape, as an object in the landscape. But then when you go into the courtyard, the tree becomes the object and the building becomes the background. So the roles kind of reverse. But they all are about juxtaposition in the kind of traditional classical sense of architecture as the man-made versus nature. And, you know, this is one of those icons of, to me, of, you know, the kind of man-made and the nature. I like this slide because of that reason of seeing the two juxtaposed against each other. I'm trying to forward this slide. It's not working. Okay. Yeah.
And then this one. No, other one.
This one, okay. This one went way back. Sorry. Too high tech. Okay. I think it's correct. The interior is about elements and the landscape of objects. As you can see, the columns themselves become kind of objects in themselves as well. They're steel angles with space in between that articulated, and they sit just as much as the furniture that we've designed for the space. One thing that this building brought to the table was the participation of the artist Saul Witt. The client had bought this wall drawing, which are about 3 pyramids with these fresco-like colors, and we worked with Saul and his assistant in terms of the proportions of the space and the coloration of this drawing, and selected a palette of materials which are not confrontational to the drawing itself, which is very rich and warm colors, but it's really about allowing the drawing to be what it is and playing, the architecture playing a sort of somewhat supportive yet juxtaposed role. in the balance of things. The client had insomnia, and so this space has to be tranquil. It's about acoustics. You can see the spill pool from the jacuzzi spills down onto the lap pool, and at night when she cannot go to sleep, she would turn off all the lights except the lights in the pool, and the lights will dance around the solid wood drawing, and the sounds of the water will lull her to sleep. That side is not happening. Something weird. It's skipping a few slides. This one and something else. Sorry, technical problems. But I think the slide on the right kind of nails down what I was trying to say about the balance of the colors. And we chose stainless steel for a particular wing wall, developed a series of light fixtures and furniture out of aluminum, stained some really dark blue wood. I guess we'll just skip those slides. It's missing in action on the left. Should I stop until it... Okay. I think we'll just go to the next project. Okay. This is the Whitney Museum downtown branch in New York City. It's in the Wall Street area, and it's in the building that is done, that's a good slide right there, by Philip Johnson. So on the left-hand side slide, you see the section of where the space is located. The space is located at one level below the subway. And so first thing that we need to do was to give the Whitney a sense of a presence at this kind of subterranean basement space. And we decided, first of all, to make a very tall marker, as tall as the trucks that are allowed in the Wall Street areas on a weekend could be. And it's brought here, and we punch through the masonry wall with his permission, of course. And then sort of did a variation of the white box gallery. What really was difficult in this project was that this is in the bowels of the building. That means all the mechanicals and whatever service spaces are all happening in the ceiling. And the gallery requires a certain height for certain work. And so we exploit it as much as possible and just clean up the ceiling as much as possible, but then establish a datum on the ceiling plane with these series of aluminum light fixtures, surface the floor with terrazzo and a kind of runner of wood where you can nail structure and sculpture into, and came in from the left-hand side a platform that has demountable rails so that large-scale works could be brought in from the half level and brought down to the gallery floor. So basically, from here you come in and then you descend a series of stairs half level down to the gallery floor. And this is a reception desk that we designed for it too. We restricted the palette to wood, terrazzo, and aluminum. Very early on in Todd and Billy's office, from probably Todd's inclination, we've worked with aluminum a lot in series of objects and structures, and developed what I call a hardware consciousness for aluminum. And the right-hand side shows a kind of bend plate detail from this platform, a place where you can kind of lean over the edge to see what's down on the gallery floor, and the open rails are connected in a way so you can take them apart and demount them to get the things in. And as you descend the stairs, you see this reception desk on the left. And the reception desk, the services for the reception desk has to be brought in, wires for security cameras and telephones and whatnot. And the responsibility of the desk to disseminate information like brochures and stuff all fed through this middle trough. and supported a canopy, which of perforated aluminum, so that as you come down the stairs, you're somewhat shielded from the mess that's going on the reception desk. The left-hand slide shows you the aluminum, perforated aluminum screen, which is coming from a high-rise apartment, which we did with a lot of input from Billy in particular. And it's a very compressed space that comes to a triangle. And what we tried to do on this project was investigate how we can actually make a different space from what is given to us. The triangle space comes to a glazed corner and you overlook 57th Street by Carnegie Hall. And we found that actually if we present layers of transparency in the space, and let's say, for example, the perforated screen is a pivoting screen, which you can open up between the dining room or dining area and the living area, and then this curved chainmail curtain, which then softens this really aggressive triangle, we actually get a greater sense of the dimension of the space than if we had left it completely open. And then the right-hand slide shows you a further investigation of the aluminum hardware consciousness and how joints are made and what surfaces can be articulated in the finishes. And this happened to be a piece that we installed in a clothing boutique up in San Francisco. Other materials that we worked with, solid wood is this Whitney chair, which we designed for the Whitney Museum downtown. First time we learned how to actually deal with solid wood, how to join it, how to bend it, how to piece it together, and the carving of the body to receive the seat of it was an interesting experiment. And on this slide on the right was a collaboration with Mary Miss of 3 telephone booths at the Crafts Museum across from the Modern in New York. And here we're trying to learn how to work with plywood, and it's literally 3 public phones that are installed in these 3 partition space, and you open these partitions and you actually go and use the phones if the guard doesn't stop you, which we ended up having to call on a daily basis from our office so that the phones would be activated. Then a diversion with Rick and also the artist, 3D artist Perry Hoberman, as part of an NEA grant for Art on the Beach at Hunters Point, which is across the East River. We did a very modest performance art and public art project. Having first came back from the Yucatan, Rick and I were very much interested in this ball court at Chichen Itza, which the icon of the hoop of the ball court is visible on the model on the left. We wanted to make a space. We thought that the ground was all about landfill. And you have a view of the east side of Manhattan. You can actually see the Empire State Building and everything. And we thought that we should make a space and we should put 2 elements that are very, elemental architectural things, 2 walls, and then have them kind of respond to each other. You can see the skyline of Manhattan. We thought that also with Perry Hoberman's input as a visual artist, we wanted to talk about the layering of images. So this big white battered wall housed 3 installations that are projected onto half-silver mylars. And so when you come up to these steps and look through these 3 windows, you can actually see a superimposed image because we built this ourselves in the heat of summer. We put in an image of a glass of water with ice cubes deluging the Empire State Building. And then the second one was a white pillow floating down the East River. And the third one was a snowstorm over Manhattan, achieved by like little foam balls with a little fan and stuff. And the juxtaposition of these 2 walls as a kind of early investigation of how 2 pieces work together, we made this compressed space so that you can actually see your body being striped by the shadow and the light of the slotted wall. And the 2, in the afternoon, the slotted wall will cast a shadow on the battered wall and vice versa in the morning. You can see the people using it. We did a performance piece for this in one evening where Perry came up with this towering inferno sound clip, and we did a performance. Each one of us stood behind a wall, and we removed part of the mylars and plexiglass from the windows, and we did a whole kind of funny performance, which we don't have any, let's see, I don't have any pictures of that. Then for a friend, Lee, I did a little apartment and pieces of it. I think we can advance the left-hand side slide. We did an apartment which has like little elements in there that they're pretty small elements within the apartment space, kind of down in the NYU area. He bought an apartment with 3 arched windows, and I really was thinking about landscape at the time and having no other options but to try to investigate landscape in the form of a rug. I designed this rug for him at the scale that I thought if I squint really hard I can imagine them as mounds or mountains or something like that. And can we try to advance those slides on the left? That's the rug itself, and then we can advance it one more. Actually, keep it there for a second. This rug, what I tried to do was, because the budget was very limited, I asked the rug maker what would drive the cost of the rug up, and he said color. So I said that, maybe we can work with 3 colors that would fit within the budget. So they said that's okay. And during the process of learning how rugs are made, I learned that if you do a cut loop versus cut pile versus loop, the color changed tremendously. And so I thought, well, maybe we can look at transparency. So the left-hand side slide shows you the rug where I imagine the milk glass to have sat over that area between the blue trapezoid and the gray field. And what it does, in fact, is makes it looking like you've put a layer of stuff over it, but it's actually a difference between the pile and the loop. And so we made 6 colors out of that rug. And this right-hand side slide shows a little table. My friend Lee is a woodworker, so he had his guys make this table. These are some of the details where I wanted to squint really hard and try to kind of think about them as excavations. And then found another friend who's a glass maker, and he works with slumped glass, which means you put pieces of glass and you melt it in the kiln. Can you advance the left-hand side slide? And you can do it now? Oh, it works, okay. So this is early on. We found out that the size of the table that fits that upper area that you can see has to be like something like 30 inches, but his kiln was too small and forced us not to be able to make a full circle of the glass. And so we had to divide it into 2 semicircles, which made a really idiosyncratic base. So I make this aluminum base for it, which have to clamp the 2 pieces of glass down. But the process of glass making was wonderful. It was very much about painting while the glass is hot and spraying chemicals on it. So if you look at from the bottom, this right-hand side slide, you can see the pieces of islands of glass actually floating around, because you have the two vantage point of being able to see the table from the top as well as from the bottom. And the 3 arch windows that I talked about earlier on the left, the way that I dealt with it was I found this one person called Mary Bright, and she's a person who was a costume designer, and she had started investigating drapery, and it's drapery like no one has ever seen before. I started talking to her, and I thought that the easiest way for this window treatment to work is if we just imagine that it's just some fabric draped over a pole. So with meticulous seamstress detailing, she invented this thing, and we put 2 pieces of fabric together to tone the color of the interior space, because the sun beats down through these windows and it actually colors through these drapery into the interior space. The back drape, which is longer, as you can see on the right, draping down to the banquette, is a big sort of polyester, very cheap gray-blue fabric. and the ones in the front is a very fine pleated silk, which is ivory color, and the two colors combined actually made the right color for the interior space. Then I asked Lee to give me a model of the scoop of his hand, because one thing that, and it maybe it's because of Robert talking about where do you put your keys when you walk in the door of your house. And I said, well, you need a key shelf, Lee. And so I wanted a wood shelf which has a register of his hand and his body on it. So we made a sectional drawing of the scoop of his hand and carved it into this shelf so that when he scoops his coins or his keys up in the morning, there will be some resonance between his hand and a piece of furniture. Then I went back to Columbia for school, and I returned back to Todd and Billy's office and started working on a show called Domestic Arrangements, which is part of a series called Architecture Tomorrow, initiated by Mickey Friedman at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. And we started looking at the house being a traditional testing ground for architects, and the way that Todd and Billy and Rick and I live, you know, sometimes storing things in garbage bags or whatever, and the way that we have designed for clients of considerable wealth. And we thought that we really should talk about how the house should be made and what the home could be. And the left-hand side shows you our first prototype of what we thought could be used as a wall element or maybe a roof element. And it was essentially this 19th century idea of like making a structure and cladding it with cladding or something like that. And it was not interesting at all. And then we started looking into other materials. First thing we started looking into was polyurethane foam, because Todd has this strange habit of bringing in stuff from the trash cans around New York City and saying, what can we make of this? And part of this ideas from the 50s and 60s, which we go back to a lot, was this idea of what, you know, this foam, what happened to all those foam domes? And which, as you know, you blow up a balloon and you spray this AB polyurethane foam on it and it hardens and you pop the balloon and you got a house. And that has always been interesting, you know. Todd, having a background in industrial design, he's really into these product-related stuff. So we started dealing with this material, found out it was absolutely toxic. And but it just happens that Minneapolis is the capital of polyurethane foam. And so we started talking to the manufacturers, and they were keen on like trying to develop what they thought was, you know, some crazy architect's attempt to revive the foam dome or something. So we made a formwork, and Todd and I were there, and we sprayed this foam into it. It's got a lid that was bolted down by 1/2-inch stainless steel bolts and stuff made out of plywood and reinforced by ribs and stuff. And the thing blew, and it was starting to crack, and all the foam people started ducking and running for cover, and us not knowing what's going on kind of stood around, and they said, get away. And so we ducked for cover, and the form blew apart, and the bolts, these 1/2-inch diameter bolts, sheared. I mean, the strength of this stuff is incredible. So needless to say, we finally figured out how much foam to put in the formwork, rebuilt the formwork, and cranked out, you know, 30, 40 pieces of this element to create this house. You can see on the right-hand side, this the idea was it's sort of like bread. We wanted a structure that is self-contained, that's not about an assemblage of things. It could support a plastic morphology, a plastic form language, and it can be skewered together in segments, which you can see the circle. The circle is kind of shish kebab together, one to another, and it's made out of a 1/2-inch thick craft paper core board. The right-hand side slide also shows you the column, which is also made out of the same 1/2-inch thick paper. Another element that, as we started looking into it, we said, well, what's the one piece of furniture that you really need? And we said, well, if we have a very long table, that would be excellent. So I started calling and ran up the long-distance calls and phone bill in the office all over the country trying to look for the biggest piece of wood, and found out that actually you can't get anything longer than 16 feet. And also found out that that would be tremendously expensive to find a solid piece of wood like that. And located pine boards that are glued together, half-inch thick, 16 feet long, which we made some benches and tables out of, you can see on the right. But at the same time, we also found that there's actually not too much first-generation wood around anymore. It's all second-generation and third-generation products. You start looking at plywood and then particle board, fiber board, paper, and then eventually recycled paper. And then we found Homosote, which we saw at Cooper Union. Some students have used it for a site model and layered it, and it produced a really beautiful texture when you sand the edges of it. So we called the Homosote company, asked them for 144 sheets of Homosote, and started thinking about what do you do with a stack of Homosote. And we thought maybe we can cut and mine shapes out of it and excavate it. So we made these walls out of, these are stacked half-inch layers cut, and then the edges sanded. And at the Smithsonian Museum, we discovered this palette, which is made out of wood chip and resin, which you can see at the bottom right corner of the right-hand side slide. And it's actually a really wonderful structure. It's a piece of pallet which you use to lift goods and stuff in warehouses, forklifts. And it's a continuous structure. The right-hand side pattern shows you that actually the divots of this kind of starburst pattern, and it drops down into legs like ham hocks. And we thought, wow, here's the technology to reinvent the plywood sheathing on 2x12 floor joists. You can just make pieces of these things and run mechanical stuff underneath it, and it will replace, you know, your 2x4s and 2x6 or whatever, 2x12s. So not having the money to really push that, because it will take a lot of research and development, we kind of copped out and put gravel in it and resin the whole thing so that you at least see what the structure is about. And Billy's interest in rugs, she worked with this company called Visosky, which is probably the most sensitive art rug makers. I mean, they would tell you things like, do not hold this color yarn in your hands because the reflection from your hand will color the yarn and you won't see the right color. Things like that. They're like ultra sophisticated about what they were doing, but they're also very expensive. And so we had looked at really old rugs where the yarn had worn down to the grid, and you can see the grid and the kind of latex which stabilized the grid, and it's actually a really beautiful thing. So Billy said, well, let's reverse the rug. And so we reversed the rug, and we tufted only occasionally, where it may symbolize a garden or a piece of water element or a place to step onto the bed. And you can see the bed on the right-hand side, which is also this long table that we made. We also had an opportunity to bring the show back into the Whitney downtown, which was an experience to be able to install back in the space that you've designed and know how terrible it worked. And the Homosote, here's on the right-hand side slide, part of what we did with it was we thought that it could be made into stairs. And if you start thinking about a rectangle, a cubical volume, it's weird, taken away from the stair, you then can do a curve cut to that block so that this chair can then sit with this one and it will make a rectangular block. So we cut it that way, and these are chairs that are scaled for, mostly scaled for children, but actually fairly comfortable for adults as well. Then while we took the show back to Whitney, we weren't really satisfied with the show as it is, and we thought that we should invent something that this thing could go on to. So the palette of materials, pretty much as is, was brought to a rural site in California, actually. And this house was made as a model form. We can see the polyurethane foam wedges here, the pallet floor, and the foam roofs, and the kind of column, the paper and wood columns. For an urban site in New York City, up in Harlem, we thought that the lightness of all the structure will be perfect to be an element that you can densify the city by building on the rooftop. So maybe a daycare center, a hydroponic garden, or something could be made on top of the roofs. Then for suburban New Jersey site, basically where Billy had grown up, we started looking at this kind of phenomenon of the second generation coming back to live with their parents because they can't afford their own home. And we thought that the front yard was absolutely a ridiculous waste of land. Why not build in the front yard and make these structures either as garages or as some kind of live condition, domestic condition for the children coming back, and then deal with the backyard in a more communal way. So we took the foam pieces and imagined that they would be made into unequal leg L's, L-shaped pieces. So you lay the short leg down and long leg across, you can make a short space, and if you turn it the other way, you make a very tall space. This is an important element because actually it comes back time and again in the recent works. Then Rick and I took a trip down to Peru as part of this whole trek through Mexico, and we came upon sites like that, which is Whitney, which is a 4-day trek into Machu Picchu, which is this, and it's just like something that hits you. It's the first time I've seen a site where I could not have imagined the site without the buildings, nor could I have imagined the buildings without the site. The landscape was all about this blanket that went over the whole thing, and it feels both old and modern at the same time. It's got this old feeling because it looks like completely handmade, like these structures, the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of the Three Windows. But at the same time, the language, the kind of sculptural language that it kind of conveys to you reminded me of like people like Noguchi's work. And I was very curious, and then later, of course, I found out he frequented these places a lot. And the Temple of the Sun also, right here in the grotto, was an amazing piece. I've seen images, black and white images of these while I was in school. I was completely dumbfounded by the way that an in situ piece of carving and then masonry from the existing stone and how they were coming together. To me, it was like really important to kind of see these plastic forms and to see that actually civic architecture can have the kind of idiosyncratic things that a personal statement, it seems like a very personal statement. You can feel like exactly how people were making it, the craftsman or the architect. Even responses to the landscape, such as this, which is called the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun, which is the most sacred piece there. The sculpting of it, the response of this to the landscape beyond, and this piece of funerary rock, and the kind of plastic language of it, and the working of the material of the stone, and exploiting the qualities of the solid, I thought was just absolutely tremendous. And even thresholds, such as the left-hand side, the thresholds of steps going into a place or a bath, where the floor and the walls and the adjoining walls are completely out of one thing, like here, reminded me of the struggle we had to try to pull the roof and the walls together as one element. And of even this one, which is Ollantaytambo, outside of Cusco, of how joints are made between megaliths of slabs and the kind of power of the contrast between something very small and something very detailed and something that is very big. And that use of the power of contrast as a way of approaching some design to me was really important. And in the streets of Cusco, you see joints like this, which really marks the way that these walls are made. Just tremendously amazing things. From our research, what they showed us was that you don't lay these kind of masonry walls from the bottom up. They actually prop these pieces. Let's say they will prop this piece up. These are protuberances where they prop these wooden pole or something like that to scaffold it up. And this bottom piece, this top piece would be completely dressed, so that this curvature and this thing was made first, and then this bottom piece is undressed, and then they would use a tool to trace this outline in midair. Let's say this is like lifted a foot off of the bottom one. Trace the outline of that down to the bottom, and with sand and water they would grind the surface down until it fits absolutely. And the issue of this making of these walls and the kind of marking of the people who made it feel very old, but at the same time the language they have felt very modern to me, especially at things like this, which is at a site called Sexe Huaman, and the kind of sculptural language that it has of the contrast of spaces like this, where you devoid the light and then you give light and the light becomes golden, reminded me of like Tanazaki's In Praise of Shadows. And then, of course, I zoomed into these sites like this, which is Canco, outside of Cusco, where I was imagining that these things could be very large land, earth art or something like that, that they could inspire you at many scales. Then I came back to California, to Los Angeles, and joined with Frank Israel's firm. And one of the first projects I worked on was this very awkward project called the Tesh House, which thank goodness didn't get built. It was kind of a collapse of many things. For example, scuppers from the Spiegel house, the roof wall element, and later on you'll see this. This is basically a piece of the strategy of this Spiegel pool house, this kind of solid back and the transparent front. And it was a house for this entertainer. You can see the fenestration. And it was a collage, it's a bricolage of all the ideas that have been floating around in other works. But at the same time as I'm working through this project, I actually started discovering that my inclination towards the sections of spaces, and did a series of investigations in the sections, which I think is probably more interesting than the building itself. Okay, so much for that. And then another very early project that I worked on was which is now built, is the Southern Regional Library Phase 2 for UCLA at a corner of Veteran and Gailey. It was one of those buildings that have absolutely no windows, and it's all about storage of books from the entire Southern UC system, very low-use books. They're like books that people don't want to look at. And there is a terrible site problem. This is exactly on the edge of the UCLA campus. Right across the street from Veteran are very powerful homeowners association for Westwood, which are very much anti-development. So the strategy was to make this building a piece of landscape. Incidentally, this model, which shows different scales of this project, which I'll talk about, is conceived by Keith Wiley, who is, I don't know if he's here, who's in school here, as well as Mark Tollins, who graduated from here, incredible craftsman. Keith and I had looked at this thing together. It's as a multi-scale thing, because this project is really occurring at different scales. At the site plan scale, how it relates to its surroundings, at the scale of this continuous elevation of precast concrete panels, because once you don't have any windows to work with, you can only work on the surface. And the idea of this landscape, which is a berm, which comes up from the street level and then finally arrives at this level and then made a 12-foot high elevation, which is what the environmental impact report asks us to do, make a 12-foot building out of this almost 3.5-story high building, which is 2.5 stories sunken into the ground. All the walls are basically the entire envelope of the building, and the shelves support the floors. Then the detail of the condition of the precast concrete as it sits over the masonry base, and then this, which is the motif of the panels themselves. The corner tells the story of when you don't have much to work with. Here on the side of the berm, the precast concrete panel sits on the masonry plinth, so it sits on it, whereas on the side of Gailey, where it has a greater elevational change, it hangs off of it, so you shift the relationship between the skin and the base. And also these scuppers, the only thing you can do to the building is like play up the overflow drain. The overflow drain will bring water, if the roof ever clogs up, onto these concrete troughs which are carved into the berm. And on the Gailey side, a variation of those scuppers turned into a trellis which will support a screen of white wisteria in about 10 years, which will then beginning to cover the building up. These are some of the details of that during construction. And a project for Michael Wu and Susan Fung, in addition to their house in Silver Lake, which is a house that never had a view of Silver Lake. And so the desire was to do something that would let them see the view of the lake, as well as maybe take on the notion of feng shui in the process of design. So as you come up to the house is renovated so that the orientation of a house is twisted from the axial approach, so that you can kind of divert the energy of the house or whatever. And 2 bedrooms are added here, a transitional step down here, and then a stair start moving up, which is on the second floor plan. You can see it moves up in a spiral, comes to a sleeping porch here, which looks back at the garden, comes into the bedroom, and then at this point open up a window, which is the only spot in the whole site where you can actually see Silver Lake beyond over here. And the interest in this project was about this kind of continuous movement. Having not ever been able to design or have a stair built, I thought that I would investigate the stair as how it might register the body at landings, what people would do at a landing when they look out, what happens at the top of it, and what happens to the top of the stair as this form starts to turn around and spiral to this form, that there will be the slit occurring here with the light coming down. The house is a fairly modest budget, and it's not an extravagantly expansive house. This is the sleeping porch, which you step up onto after you arrive at the top of the stair, and you can open up the windows and sleep there. And this is the other one, which is a window that looks out onto Silver Lake. Not really successful. And then Limelight, which I worked in conjunction with various people in my office, especially Joe Holson, who's also a graduate from here. This was in Hollywood, and in a kind of seedy part of Hollywood. And Tom and Danelle would know about this area, because they built right on top of here. Limelight Productions is a film production company, and these people work sometimes like students do, 24 hours, 48 hours at a time. So one of the important things that we looked at was the issue of light for these spaces during off hours. It looks pretty much like a club or something. At the opening, it was kind of strange because they actually have bouncers outside. But the plan of it was that, what do you do when you come from the outside on the Hollywood street? What do you do when you walk inside? And this composite plan shows a kind of processional space into a kind of open pool space. And I'll show you the sectional detail. Let's see, right here. It's also not a very high budgeted project, fairly modest. So first of all, I thrusted this canopy, which is 7 foot high, the minimum legal limit for this kind of space, so that you completely compress as soon as you walk in. This canopy will then fold itself onto the wall, which you can see at the back view here. It's kind of continuation of the investigation on the roof wall idea. Then put in this overscale banquette as a juxtaposition to this kind of scale change at the beginning. Then this light wall, which is a backlit fluorescent fiberglass structure, is mainly what gives the place a lot of light during the off hours. The conference room is part of the initial reception areas you see on the left, and this is the inside view of it. Rick helped to make this table, a very simple table of stacked wood and aluminum pole through it and glass on top, and some very cheap light fixtures over a perforated canopy on top. In the pool area, sort of a slightly more low-budget cousin of the reception table at the Whitney, the same idea of the service trough in the middle, dividing it into spaces for 8 people, and the detail of the light wall with the ideas of these folded slits. The hardware consciousness was still with me, and we made legs out of aluminum. We took aluminum into other areas, such as the connection between one wall to another wall by these kind of plumbing fixture fittings, and maybe an angle to stiffen up the front edge of a plywood counter. And then finally a project came along where you feel like you resolve some issues. The roof wall thing was something that I worked with for a long time, and it never really, as you can see from the Tesh project, didn't really have a good marriage with anything else. And this is a house in The Hague, which is part of a development of 8 houses. This never got built. But the idea was that I could use both the idea of a spiral plan, started from the Wu house, a kind of spiral movement through the plan, as well as this, which was the roof wall structure over the spiral plan. Taking you through the plan a little bit in the beginning, I have to backtrack this one maybe. You come in through here after the carport, and you're at this level, which is the dining and the kitchen and the service area. You step down a few steps into the living room, which has a mezzanine above in this dotted line area, and then further higher up space here. From here, you can also go up half a level to this, which is the mezzanine space over this area, which you can look out this way. And then from the mezzanine, you can actually go half a level up to 2 bedroom spaces that shares a bath. And from that level, you can go up another half a level to go up onto another bedroom, which is on the top, which leads you out to a terrace that you walk back down to the level where the 2 bedrooms are. So it was a little bit of a puzzle, and I think this section shows it much better. Here's the living room level, the entry level, the mezzanine level, the 2 bedroom level, and the main bedroom level, and the terraces beyond. And I think it came to some level of resolution, this one. The roof wall begins to be a metal piece, such as the carport canopy, and this wrap of the entire building would be out of a masonry because of the rich masonry tradition in Holland. These are some views of it. The left-hand side, the view from the Menisci garden, and the right-hand side, the kind of street view of it. These screens will be a little wooden moving screen from the mezzanine level. This is a window off of one of the bedrooms. Unfortunately, it's not built. Then the Draeger house, which is built after the fire of the Oakland Hills fire, our client, Sharon Draeger, came to us. She's a very powerful woman, a vascular surgeon, someone who raises her own 2 children by herself, and immediately that kind of energy tainted this project. I'll show you a space which I call it a feminine space as opposed to what Aaron Betsky called it, the queer space. This is the garage level, which you can come up to some stairs, and you arrive at a kind of guest level, I guess. I think this is the slide is reversed on the right, which is feed out onto a terrace. And then you can also take exterior stairs up here and enter here, step down onto a living room, kitchen, dining room, which is semi-subterranean. And this is a major space of the house. It links the whole house together. It's through the entry you walk up the stair space, which is about 2.5 stories high. You flank 2 children's rooms on either side of it, cut a hole here to reveal, look back down into the dining space, and made a bedroom for her, as well as a study, which is kind of panoptic, because from the study, she can look down at that level where people are entering, look through this at the views of the bridges, as well as look back at all the activities going around the stairs. I'll show you the pictures of it. Incidentally, this is a 3-story high space. This is the top level of it, and it goes down to the living room, and it will as well go down to the family room at the 2nd level. This is the front view of it. Typically, you probably should have all glass in here because this is where the view to the bays are. But I think in a way it worked out great because these are the windows from her study, which is framing a view. The view is denied here, the view is picked up again from here, and actually the solid and the contrast between the denial of the view and the kind of giving of the view gave it a lot more theater to the house as you move through it. It's very simply a kind of tent over a big loft. The roof of the house is continuous with the walls. It comes down. The idea was about kind of folded paper or fabric that drapes over these gray-green stucco terraces. And it comes down, it folds back, which is this chimney structure, and it lends itself to a kind of cut of the window, and then another view of it. At the same time, the site strategy was to prepare the ground to have the profile of this house make a statement against the kind of slope of the hill, so that the idea of the landscape and the gesturing of the landscape was about the scissors, so that there's a slope here and then the house began to peel off of that pivot point and bring up another slope. These are what's getting built over in the Oakland Hills area, unfortunately. Then this is a plaster wall, which is part of the color of Sharon's shoes, which she sent to us. It was a difficult thing. This is a section of the house. You can see the main stair area. This is the section from the living level to the bedroom level, and the hanging study right here, and her bedroom beyond. And the other section, which has to do with, this is the section of her bedroom and the kind of circulation through passing by the children's area and going out into a kind of landscape hill beyond is their back garden. This is the view of the stair space, standing from the top landing, looking back down at the entry, the doors to the children's space, and her bedroom and study beyond. And this little leak of light is the space where you can look over to the left-hand side, over down to the dining room. Here's the study again, where one can stand here and look back down at this level, which is the entry. And this is the pair, basically, her study is part of a circulation. It's not a defined room. It's really a kind of passageway to her bedroom beyond. And this photograph doesn't show it, but this window would capture the view of several bridges over the bays. And then this is the other side of this edge glass plane, which is a sitting area of her bedroom. And this is the space which drops down 3 stories. You can lean over the edge and look basically all the way down through the living room to the family room. The copper shingles was a challenge. We wanted to select a palette which is reminiscent of what happens in the Berkeley area, which is a lot of stucco and wood, and also things like copper. To kind of reinstate the palette in a different way, the shingle was necessary because of this plastic form that was draping over the house. You just have to kind of paper it out. And it was extremely difficult to get to these corners. I learned a lot about geometry, I guess, how to deal with these corners which are canted at both angles, and you want a horizontal line. So you end up having to cut a chevron-shaped shingle in order to fit around the corner. And the changing quality of the copper was pretty amazing in different lights. And because it was seen as a fabric drape, there was no qualms about cutting a big slit between the roof and the windows. That's the window that actually leads into the dining room. And at different conditions of light, the copper takes on different character, which wasn't expected at all. You see the palette on the left and the detail of the entryway on the right. Segue into a very small project which Norman Millar and Chris Jarrett initiated, part of a show at the Barnstall, which we're using very small-scale interventions to service the community. We targeted, Rick and I and George Yu, targeted the Chinatown Service Center, which is a nonprofit organization that gives like outpatient clinics and help with languages for immigrants and whatever. And they needed a structure to go into health fairs to disseminate information. It has to be portable. And so we thought about a tent. And so we took the shock poles from tents, which are the poles that you can fold, and they have an elastic cord. If you shake it, they get stiff. Put 3 of them down here and spring basically one arch that went this way, another arch which went down here, and then one we left alone. And this fabric is Tyvek, which is the Federal Express envelope. And fortunately, we called them and said we're developing a prototype which could be marketable, and they gave us 100 yards of this stuff to play with. Little do they know. And it was interesting because we started with these little muslin and wire things, and we worked it out. And I think, fortunately, this tent is having a second life. It's going to be at PS 122 in New York for part of a dance choreography thing tuned to the Margaret Lantana, who worked with John Cage for a while. She's going to play a 2-foot little upright piano next to this thing, and someone's going to dance within it, which then the silhouette will be shown or something like that. Segue into a project for a friend on Beverly Boulevard, sort of this upcoming fashion district. Tom Mark's clothes are very simple, and sometimes it's about transparency, always about materials, always about seams and joints, meticulously made, and very body conscious. And you know, he came to us with very tight budget and said, well, I have this space that I lease. It's got 2 giant skylights, one here and one back here. Shoebox proportion, really high ceiling, very live. It's like everything clicks because it's all concrete and everything. So we thought of putting the homesort walls as these dividers. The space has to be tuned so that it doesn't distract from the clothing. So it has to be actually more subdued than the clothing itself. So the homosot provided a good foil, the gray kind of homosot. The homosot also is very acoustically deadening, like it deadens all the sound. So it was a good balance for the acoustics of the space. Deal with very simple colors, the white with light yellow and this dark gray-green, and took the fabric, took the fiberglass backlit panels and start to swing this section from the wall up to the roof in layers. This project was built by C.J. Bonora, who also was a graduate from here, who worked for Frank Gehry for a while, and built Big and Tall bookstore, and basically obliterated one of the skylights because it was just overpowering to have two skylights that have like a 6-foot high section to it. So during the day, the skylight would light this, and at other times, the fluorescents will light this on these. And just in the front, a very simple wall shelf out of aluminum, something that is not so rectilinear than the rest of it, maybe recalling the curve of this big sectional cascading fiberglass. UC Riverside Fine Arts, almost last project I'll show you. It started out, it's the first partnership project, and with Barbara and also later Stephen and Frank. And UC Riverside has 6 art departments: studio arts, music, dance, art history, creative writing, and film. Wanted to be in the same house but as separate entities. They don't want to be School of Fine Arts. They wanted to be a kind of collective. So after extensive interviews, they selected us in conjunction with a firm up in Oregon called Borer Architects, and we started working out 3 schemes for them. We thought that we have to show them what it would look like if it looks like the Cesar Pelli building, or what it would look like if it looks like the student union, or, which we know that this one was going to take, what it might look like if you drape a fabric over the whole thing. And of course, like the fine arts faculty was much more keen onto creating a spectacle. They basically said, you know, it's a very collaborative process with the fine arts faculty. They're very well read. They know what's going on in architecture. And they wanted, because there's so many performing arts department in there, they wanted the building to serve as a spectacle. First of all, it's a very key gateway site. From the freeway, you come down this University Avenue. Currently, there's no buildings here. The campus starts right here. And this would be the first building you would encounter if it ever gets built as you come onto UC Riverside. And with Peter Walker and William Johnson and partners as the landscape designers, we were developing this fine arts mall and this kind of ceremonial circle, which not too many people liked. And we really want the building to kind of confront that, so it actually nips into the circle a little bit. And the massing of the building is very much about, I think maybe in terms of a simple language, a C shape, which encompasses a multi-level courtyard here, a speed of going from slow to quick. Incidentally, another SIRE graduate also worked a great deal on this project. Rick and I had worked a lot on this, as well as for a short time Fernando Bracer also contributed to this project. A slow speed and a fast speed. Music is here. This is a recital hall. It's a mass. It's a solid mass of stuff. So it necessarily becomes almost an anchor. And as you start swinging around, these are the dance performance spaces, which are much more agitated. This plan, which only Rick can work out, is this is University Avenue. The recital hall, which is part of this whole music department, of a gamelan room which opens out to the courtyard, an early there's a gamelan room, early music space, large rehearsal, a screening room, 75-seat screening room, 150-seat lecture hall, sculpture as part of the studio arts, sculpture shop, outdoor courtyard for the studio arts department, outdoor courtyard for the music department, a passageway through to the entry to the parking. This is the Fine Arts Mall, which you enter, through here at this courtyard, which serves as an outdoor lobby for the recital hall. And then going up the stairs to another level of courtyard. This space is the Black Box Experimental Theater, which opens out onto this courtyard. the stair will take you up at a different level, as well as the elevators here. And you come underneath one bridge, two bridges, dotted opening above you, and you can come to an inter-arts computer center, which they all use together, go into the dance department, and then at the second level, you can walk up these stairs into a second level courtyard, which serves as the outdoor lobby for the big dance performance halls, as well as a student gallery at the top of the stairs and landing. You go over bridges and you can look down, and the bridges take you to the second level of the Black Box Theater. And you can circulate from these stairs up outside of like these outdoor walkways into the second level of the music library and departments and all these higher volume spaces, and as well as the creative writing department, which is right here as a two-story space where it will be left open 24 hours a day with books that encourages theft. And this is what they wanted to be the living room of the whole complex. And these are another early study model of struggling with this piece, which doesn't quite want to work with the rest of the project at the second level. This is the end of schematic design, incidentally. The project has been shelved. Here you see the dance performance spaces and another view of it. This will be the view as you drive down. It will be very sort of massive, carved out, and slow. And then you go around the back. The back will come, or where the parking side entrance will be, it will begin to go from mass to articulated roof forms that kind of keep peeling off and gets quicker and quicker as you go around these courtyards of the different departments. Last set of slides. Put this in for Mike Cranfield, who's here today. It was my last project at Columbia, and it was interesting because Mike Cranfield sat next to me. He's taught at Kentucky for a long time. He's doing his PhD at McGill right now. And the guy's always looking at Kurt Schwitter's and the Merzbau. And he builds these models out of paper that's scored and put together, and they look more like insects than buildings. And we always have this dialogue. It's like, Mike, you have to get this built. It's not validated until it gets built. And my project was about trying to make a building that has the energy that eventually, I guess, resolved at the Riverside Fine Arts Project, that was about getting it built. And I think that's basically what I want to focus on, is that I believe, and this is something that I think Frank and my partners, Barbara, and all the people in my office also believe, is that you can't design it so that it cannot be built. You have to design it so that it's built. It's only when it's built that you can truly criticize it, because there's so many accidents and there's so many things that you cannot even model all the lighting conditions in a computer or whatever. Going back to the Spiegel house, we selected all the material for the right color, and you throw it in there and it's not quite right. And there's no substitute for building after all. So hopefully Riverside will come back and I'll be truly able to test what got started here. Thanks. Any questions? Yeah. No? Okay. Thank you all for coming.